anniversary of the income tax. Somehow I forgot to celebrate, although again, that's not really the word. Maybe commiserate, mourn the 100 years of income taxes. But let me remind everybody again why we have an income tax. I think it's very important because, today we're living in this age of class warfare, the 99% versus the 1%, where the government is promising all kinds of goodies for the 99% if they'll simply tax the 1% to pay for it. Well, the original battle of the 99% versus the 1% was 100 years ago in the agitation for the income tax. Why did the American public approve an income tax? I mean, you would think today, income tax is miserable. Why would the people want an income tax, given the misery that we all suffer having to pay that tax? Although not all of us, because a lot of us don't pay it. Only about half the country now pays the tax. Well, the reason is because 99% of the country weren't going to pay the tax. Believe it or not, the income tax was about a tax cut for the 99%. Back in 1913 or before 1913, pretty much the main income tax, the main federal taxes that people paid were tariffs, taxes on products imported into the United States. That was the big deal. And what the politicians said was that, hey, this isn't fair. The poor and the middle class spend most of their money. And so the rich, they're not really paying their fair share because, they're not paying all these tariffs because they earn all this money and they spend a little bit. Let's have an income tax that will affect the rich. And then we won't have to have tariffs. We can get rid of all these tariffs. So in other words, it was stick it to the 1%, soak the rich, and everybody else is going to have a tax cut. In fact, government is going to be free for the average person because we're going to pay for it all by asking the most fortunate among us, the multimillionaires, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts. We'll ask them to pay a tiny little teeny income tax on their income, and the rest of us, the 99% plus, will have a tax cut. In fact, if you go back and look at the income tax, the lowest bracket started at incomes of $20,000 per year. And then if your income was between $20,000, the income that you had between $20,000 and $50,000 was taxed at 1%. So anything below $20,000, you paid no income taxes. And between $20,000 and $50,000, you paid 1%. Now, to put that in perspective, gold was $20 an ounce back then. So if you take $1,300 gold right now to adjust for inflation, that initial tax bracket in today's dollars would apply to incomes between $1.3 and $3.25 million. How many Americans today earn more than $1.3 million a year? Not very many. This wouldn't even affect the top 1%. This is a tax that would have affected the top 1% of the top 1%, if that. And only 1%. 1%. Now, if your income was $500,000 a year, which is, tens of millions today, right? Then you got into the top bracket. The top bracket, 6%. 6%. That was it. Now, the American voters bought this. They swallowed the bait. Yeah, let's tax the rich, and we won't have to pay any taxes anymore. Well, look at the situation today. Today, the income tax hits poor people, middle-class people, with higher rates than anything even envisioned for Rockefeller and Carnegie and Mellon and those guys. Think about it. Today, you pay the lowest bracket is 10%, and it starts at your first dollar. Now, yes, there is an exemption, but that exemption was much bigger back in 1913 than it is now. So after all your deductions and credits, back in 1913, you had to have $20,000 of income, which is $1.3 million today, before you got into the 1% bracket on the excess above that. Today, after you take your credit, you pay 10% on the first dollar you earn. That's 67% more taxes than was the highest bracket in 1913. And now the highest bracket is 39% or something like that. And 39.6. And that doesn't even account the 3.8% Medicare tax, which of course didn't exist in 1913, hadn't been created yet. But just look at the 39.6. That bracket starts for a single taxpayer at $400,000 a year. To put those numbers in perspective of 1913 and put it back with price of gold, $1,300 an ounce today versus $20 an ounce back then, the top bracket today would apply in 1913 to incomes of $6,150. So could you imagine in 1913 if they said, hey, we're going to impose an income tax that taxes everybody's income at a minimum of 10%, everybody, the poorest among us, and if your income gets to $6,150 a year, we're going to take about 40% of everything above that. 40%. Remember, the lowest bracket where you started to pay 1% was more than 3 times that $6,150. But now people that were totally exempt from the income tax in 1913, whose incomes could triple and they would still be completely exempt from a 1913 income tax, now get hit with the highest possible bracket, 39.6%, which is, Rockefeller was taxed at 6%. So 39 divided by 6, that's 6.5 times. That's a six and a half times bigger tax, higher tax than what, the richest people in America, the richest people in the world, because the richest Americans were the richest people in the world back in 1913. So now, we're taxing people that, just are high income earners, not super rich, because $400,000 today, yes, it's a good income, but it's nothing like the 1.3 million that you needed to get in 1913 equivalent dollars before you were asked to pay 1%. 1%. And now it's 40 times that in that bracket. And you know what? They still want more. So whenever you hear somebody talking about, hey, I got a new idea, a politician tries to come with you and say, hey, I got a new benefit, goodies for you, and don't worry, it won't cost you anything because we'll make the rich pay for it. Yeah, when any politician tells you about all the free stuff you're going to get if you'll just let them impose a new tax on the rich, think about the income tax. Think about how much you enjoy paying income taxes every year, and don't swallow the bait. Don't fall for it. That's how the government works. It's that camel's nose under the tent. It didn't take long. It only took a few years before they jacked that income tax rate up in 1913, sky high. The government operates quick. Once they get you, they get you. Once you fall for their trick, once you buy into this class warfare nonsense, which is very popular with voters, they got you. And when people look back and say, hey, we voted for an income tax, not this income tax, nobody would vote for the tax that we've got today. Of course, except the people that still don't pay it. But even them, they might not be that mean.